So this is one of those weeks where I can't tell whether Washington is in forward gear or reverse gear. I mean, I just interviewed Senator Bennett and I asked him the basic question, are we getting closer to the cliff or are we getting further away from the cliff? And I really don't know at this point.
Yeah, well, I think he's got the answer right.
We don't know.
I mean, look, so we know a couple of things. A, each side is playing for the cameras and doing an awful lot of that, inviting in different groups of businessmen, posturing. We know there's some communications behind the scenes. And Some,
but
yes.
not a whole lot.
It doesn't, well, what I was going to say is that if they were really negotiating, they'd spend less time talking to us because they'd be trying to keep things quiet. And the president has dug in his heels on we are going to raise tax rates, maybe not all the way to Bill Clinton's level, but we're going to raise them. And the Republicans have yet to acquiesce to that or to come up on paper with a solution that the president says meets his goals without raising tax rates.
I think one of the most interesting things this week is that the financial markets have finally started to ignore, the daily mutterings of the political leaders.
True.
We saw those 100-point swings last week. Now they're just starting to ignore it. I think there's two schools of thought. One is that things are as ugly as the leaders are making them out to be, and the other school of thought is they're doing this kind of traditional Washington dance, and as we get closer to the edge, some miraculous deal will come together. Yeah,
but I wrote in a column this week, and I at least laid out the possibility that that's the traditional Washington game, is you push everything to the end so that you've shown your partisans you've done everything you could, and then you cut to the middle for the deal. But what if you've gotten the two sides so dug in along the way that you can't get them to pull up their stakes and go to the middle?
I think there's a huge risk of that.
I think,
and I don't think the markets are going to be so happy for the next 3 weeks.
No, my prediction is next week they start to turn around and get jumpy again because.
Well, I think one thing we're watching too is, and the big question the Republicans are asking is the White House going to overplay their hand? Are they going to draw too many lines in the sand? Are they going to really willing to go to the edge of the cliff, and then maybe Boehner can't get his caucus together to get a deal at the end of the day?
There's an interesting national security wrinkle this week. You had Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Zbigniew Brzezinski, and a bunch of big names say, this is a national security issue now. We got to get our fiscal house in order, and that's become a pretty common theme too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Clinton's been saying that wherever she goes
Hillary
in the world.
Clinton's been saying that, yeah.
Yeah, if we don't get our finances and our economic power in check. I mean, I think a lot of the criticism in some ways of the U.S. handling of the Arab Spring is that we haven't sort of engaged financially or economically like we did at the end of the Cold War and really, restructure countries. I just don't think we have the money these days to do it, and as a result, it feels like we just don't have that much influence in shaping Egypt or some of these countries.
And worse than not having the money, I think, is the fact that people know you don't have the money, so I think they don't expect a lot of American intervention. I don't know what the consequences are.
Right. In addition, it doesn't look like we can run a country. It's not such a good
well,
thing
there's
for
that too. There's that too.
Do you think it complicates things when we're in this transitional phase with Geithner on his way out and Clinton on her way out? Does that make it harder for us to both negotiate here and diplomatically?
I'm not sure that's the issue. You would have thought there would be a big awkward transition moment here, except everything is so status quo. You got the same leadership in the White House, you got the same leadership in the cabinet still, you got the same leadership in Congress. So I think I don't think that's the problem. I think we're stuck because the system is stuck, and I think the system doesn't know how to get unstuck. Maybe it will magically by the end of the year.
And I think that one of the things the president is trying to do, and we've written this, is to use this as a precedent. I'm going to be a much more aggressive negotiator over the next 4 years, and the Democrats are looking to him and saying, if you flinch too early on this, you're not going to get anything.
But I think there's something else at work here, and all of us who've talked to administration officials, I suspect, have this same feeling. They really are absolutely convinced that in the end, Republicans will give on tax rates.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's how this will be solved. And maybe they're right, but I think that explains just about everything that's going on, is they don't think they need to give on the core issue here, which is rates.
Well, yeah, Boehner's problem is every day Obama seems to pick off one more Republican, right? He doesn't have as many as he needs, but the flow is moving his way, and so that's, I think, just why would Obama offer anything as a concession yet to
But is
Boehner?
it a flow or is it a trickle of Republicans? I'm not.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, at this point, we're talking 6 or 7 or 8 people. He needs about 100.
But if you're in the White House and you want to convince yourself, this shows us that eventually they're going to give.
Maybe the dam's
you
breaking.
see that there. Yeah, exactly.
Is the other big fight expected to be the Secretary of State-ship after the fiscal cliff? Because it seems like a similar situation. Obama, it's an early fight. He seems like he's backed himself into a hole in some ways. But on the other hand, I've seen McCain recently. He seems to be loving this. I mean, it seems like they want to fight it out.
Well, I think there's two questions here. One is, does the president want to pick a fight about confirmation right off the bat, or nominate John Kerry instead of Susan Rice? On the other hand, does the president figure that Republicans really want to make a stink after this election about having a black woman Secretary of State?
Yeah, but I think they probably do. I mean, that's my feeling. 'Cause, I think what happens in these situations is that the opposition party tends to pick one or two nominations to take a stand on, and then everybody else gets a free pass. And I think they've decided Susan Rice is the one.
Because of Benghazi.
Because of Benghazi, and because of the fact that they would be vulnerable to this. Well, you're just against a black woman being Secretary of State. Except they say, oh, what about that Condoleezza Rice, Republican Secretary of State? So I mean, they may be wrong, but I think they do want to have this fight, and I'm not sure that they'll win, but I think they do.
Do you think the president wants to have the fight too?
I think he'll take it. I don't think he has any choice. I think they've backed him into a corner. But I suspect the president will win. But I don't think they mind having the fight. Again, they could be wrong about the politics of this, but that's my feeling.
Isn't it kind of amazing though? In the week after the election, there was this big cry for bipartisanship from both sides, and it's really just evaporated.
Yeah.
I think in the last week or two.
Although on immigration, it might still hold together.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But while we're talking about all this, Jay, the other thing that I thought was going on that was really interesting this week was that the Syria situation just seems to get uglier and uglier. And I don't know how much more dangerous it is, but you had the president warning the Syrians, don't use chemical weapons, which has to be because they saw something that made them think chemical weapons might actually be used in the Syrian conflict. What do you think they saw?
Well, we're picking up from the Pentagon that spy satellites and human intel are picking up the movement of sarin gas from some of the previous sort of stockholes that they know they had to new areas where they could, the perception I'm getting is that Assad is not going to control Damascus possibly much longer. And Damascus was never truly his stronghold. It's a Sunni city and he's an Alawite. So the general analysis is he'll probably end up trying to carve out some kind of zone that he can still defend, and that the chemical weapons are sort of a threat against anyone sort of challenging that line. There have been some pretty aggressive reporting that we haven't confirmed that people have actually seen them mixing precursors and getting ready to fire them off. I don't think it's that close, but they certainly seem to be moving it in a direction sort of for a final stand of some point. And
do the Americans and the others in the West have a clear idea of who they want in the opposition and a way to separate out the good guys from the opposition from the bad guys?
Not really. Clinton's going to a big conference next week where the new opposition body is being established, and a big part of that is to try to get the political arm and the military commands kind of fused into one structure, get aid coming in a way that they can monitor it and sort of show people on the ground in Syria that it's kind of this pro-Western grouping that's delivering goods, because there is a big role of Sunni extremist al-Qaeda elements that are part of this opposition.
Yeah, and that sort of gives you the feeling that maybe we're heading toward the worst of both worlds in Syria, that you're going to have an opposition that is getting stronger, but that is made up of people who are either resentful of the fact that the U.S. didn't help them more earlier, and has a growing contingent of the bad guys. And there's your bad outcome. Not a great opposition finally is in a position to do something about taking over, and meanwhile they've decided they don't like us very much in the end anyway. Or is that too pessimistic?
No, I think I know the Israelis are particularly fearful that you're going to have just a perfect storm of everything's bad. You'll have an element of the Assad regime, the Iranians, and the Hezbollah still controlling sort of the coastal areas, so they can still ship weapons into Lebanon. You could have sort of Sunni extremist groups controlling certain parts of central and southern Syria, and like the Kurds having their own thing, and all of them would be hostile towards Israel and the Western, and that's a real possibility.
Which only destabilizes the entire region, basically.
Right. And it
because
could bleed
which is so stable with Egypt and the rest of it.
Exactly.
Jay, how quickly could this escalate? I think everyone's been watching the situation in Syria for months and months. How quickly could this get really ugly now that we're talking about chemical weapons?
I think the perception is it really has gotten to the point that you could wake up in a week and find out Assad was gone, and then but there is still no unified opposition, and it could just kind of break down. I think there is a real, besides just chemical weapons, a real fear of some sort of major ethnic, the Alawite clan that ruled for so long and was so repressive, there could be, real retaliation against them. And the Christians are very worried too.
And then that's when you get your call for U.S. troops to go in, not for security reasons, but on humanitarian grounds, and that's going to be hard to resist because everybody else is, like the Turks are not exactly neutral brokers in these things, and so that could be the mess of next year for Barack Obama, no? And
just the chemical weapons. Say the place isn't totally broken down, but the Pentagon, we've read an estimate that said they'd need 75,000 U.S. troops to help secure the chemical weapons sites. Even if there's, even if they can go in relatively stable, I don't see us being able to send 75,000 troops. So will we try to do a UN sort of operation and get
Turks.
74,000 U.S. troops and 1,000 from the Belgian Congo.
Mali.
But it's a big threat. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
this stuff is weaponized. It's on Scud missiles, on artillery, so it's a problem.
Well, I think this is the sleeper issue of the week and maybe the year. Meanwhile, next week we'll be back on the road to the fiscal cliff, and maybe we'll have a clearer idea of what that Obama second-term administration is going to look like. We'll talk about all that on DC Bureau. Hope you can join us. Meantime, you can join the conversation on Twitter at #WSJLive. I'm Jerry Seid.